Welcome to the series, The Power of Principle Thinking by Dr. Gerald Mann. Dr. Mann is the senior pastor at the Riverbend Church in Austin, Texas. Let's join Dr. Mann for more of The Power of Principle Thinking.
We're doing a series of sermons called The Power of Principle Thinking. I believe in positive thinking. I believe in possibility thinking. But I also believe that the theme of the Bible is that when you positively run out of possibilities to keep your life together, there's some principles taught in the Bible that you can fall back on. And I put some of them in my last book, and I've got a whole bunch more. Today is one of my favorite ones, and many of you have heard me say this on numerous occasions. This is one of the things I live by. This is not one of the ideas I have. It's one of the ideas that has me. And it's called Miracles Happen in Miracle Territory. And I'm going to read from Hebrews, the 11th chapter, that great list of the heroes of the faith. We're going to read about Noah and Abraham and Moses and the people of Israel. In verse 7 it says, "It was faith that made Noah hear God's warnings and obey him in the future that he could not see. He obeyed God and built a boat in the sunshine, in which he and his family were later saved. It was faith that made Abraham obey God when God called him to go to a strange new country that he'd promised him. He left his own country without even knowing where he was going. It was faith that made Moses, when he had grown up, refuse to be called the son of the king's daughter. He preferred to suffer with God's people rather than to enjoy sin for a little while. He reckoned that to suffer hardship for the Messiah was worth far more than all the treasures of Egypt, because he kept his eyes on the future reward. It was faith that made the Israelites able to march into the Red Sea as though it were dry land. When the Egyptians tried to do it, the water swallowed them up." Miracles happen in miracle territory. How many of you have ever heard of a guy named Dr. Homer Dodge? Anybody here ever heard of Homer Dodge? Good. I hadn't heard of him either. I read about him several years ago. He was in his 90s, and he was being interviewed for a major magazine article. He was a president emeritus of a college up in Vermont, and he was quite an adventurer. He had a PhD in physics and anthropology. He traveled all over the world. He'd been lost in Antarctica and given up for dead. He was lost in the Amazon Valley for several months and dodging headhunters. He went into the Philippines and made contact with ancient Indian tribes. He just lived an adventure-packed life, and he'd had many scrapes with death. And when he was 85 years old, he became the oldest whitewater canoeist in the world. He ran the Long Salt Rapids on the St. Lawrence River, the first person to do it in an open canoe since the early fur traders. And they were interviewing him about what made his life so adventuresome. And he said, "I had one philosophy. I always put myself where interesting things could happen." He said, "If you want to have an interesting life, put yourself where interesting things happen." He said, "I've experienced miracles," because he was a man of deep faith. He said, "because I always put myself where miracles can happen." And when I read that, I said, now that will preach. I always put myself where miracles can happen. And I got to thinking, miracles do happen in miracle territory. Why would God get involved in doing something for us that he's already given us the capacity to do by ourselves? It's only when we have the courage to move beyond the limit of our own sufficiency that miracles occur. And let me clear something up. Miracles don't have to be a defiance of natural law as we understand it. After all, natural law is the sum total of what we think we know about the laws of nature that we think we're looking at. So a miracle is any time God gets involved directly in your life, you know he's involved, and something radical changes about you and the way you're doing life. Miracles happen, though, only when you move beyond the limits of your own sufficiency. And that's the theme of the Bible. As you read that Hebrews passage that I read, the one thing that all the heroes had in common was that they kept moving beyond the limits of their own sufficiency. And every time they did, miracles occur. Okay, what I would like to do is talk to you about how we move, you and I, into miracle territory. How do you put yourself in a place where God gets directly involved and you know He's there and your life has changed? Well, we can use these heroes as examples. First, Noah. All this is going to rhyme. They would like this sermon at the seminary sermon workshop because everything rhymes, okay? Point number one. Are you ready? You're in miracle territory when you perform before the storm. Noah built the boat while the sun was shining. He obeyed God before the storm. He didn't develop what we call foxhole religion. He didn't wait till all the bombs were bursting and the lightning was coming and the rain was coming. He built the boat before the storm. Bill Cosby used to do the funniest routine on this. You can imagine Noah out here in this desert, scorpions running around, sheep dying from drought, and his friends walk by and say, "What are you doing, Noah?" "I'm building an ark." "Why?" "Well, this is a heck of a flood coming. It's going to ground everybody." The point is that the people who experience miracles are those who do the hard things during the good times. It's not very difficult to get religious during bad times. You show me the people who obey God during the good times, and I'll show you people who keep running into God in the strangest places. I've been reading the mystics of old. Great men like Thomas à Kempis and Bernard of Clairvaux and Thomas Merton. These guys walked with God. They breathed with God. They talked to Him every day. And the reason they did is that they obeyed Him before the tragedies of life struck. One of my favorite friends in all the world, a real gift to me, some of his family is here right now, is a little guy named Homer Hanna. He is the director of South Texas Baptist Children's Home Orphanage. He is the father to over 100 kids, and he has a magnetism about him. The kids just love him. There's a saying, if dogs and kids follow a man around, you can always trust him. Well, that's true. Dogs and kids follow Homer everywhere. He decided to become a preacher when he was 12 years old. I heard him tell a group at youth camp one time where all the preachers were giving their testimonies, and we'd heard stories about recovery from drugs and alcohol and juvenile delinquency and every bad thing you can imagine. And then it was Homer's turn, and he said, I never got into all of that. I have a kind of a boring story. He said, I decided to become a preacher when I was 12, and then I fell in love with the girl that I eventually married. We were in junior high, and he said, first time I kissed her, it was the most wonderful feeling in the world. He said, then we started dating, and he said, we started hugging, and we started kissing, and he said, man, I awakened to what all of y'all have awakened to, and they were all sitting there going like this, and he said, then came the moment when we had to decide, sex or no sex, and he said, I decided, well, I just kind of keep my life simple. So I waited. He said, then all the guys had contests to see who could outdrink the other. So whoever could chug-a-lug the most beers and throw up, they were the heroes. Strange way. He said, I just decided I'd keep my life simple and not do that. He said, I don't have anything to tell y'all except this. The simpler I've kept my life, the closer I have found God to be. I challenge you to go read Matthew 5 through 7 this week. That's the Sermon on the Mount. And try to live it for 1 month. For 30 days, live the Sermon on the Mount. And miracles will find you. Perform before the storm. Second point, it rhymes too. You're in miracle territory when you go before you know. That's Abraham. God called him to go, and he didn't know where. He just went. He did not say, well, I'd like a world atlas, if you please, God. Let me know. Let me know where I'm going. Let me know how I'm going to get there. Let me know if the banker's going to lend me the money and what interest he's going to charge me. And let me know if there are any monsters over there and what kind of weapons I'm going to use. And give me a full, mapped-out plan. And then, Lord, I'd like an insurance policy signed by God. You will not be hurt. If you do, I will give you 10,000 years in heaven, signed God. No. It said he just got up and went. People experience miracles who go before they know, who are able to trust God enough to venture without knowing how it's going to turn out. I was in Bermuda one time, and I went out to where I like to go to the ports and talk with the local fishermen. And I hung around with them for 2 or 3 days and got to know them, and I have an affinity for weird people anyway, and so I got to know them, and one day I was standing there talking to him, and there was a guy right down the pier there who had a little 20-foot sailboat. I think it's called a sloop. I don't know much about sails, but I think it's called a sloop. and it was had all the paint knocked off of it, and the rigging was all weathered. And one of these old fishermen said, "That stupid idiot is setting out for England." The guy was loading the boat. That he has sailed from the United States to here, and now the fool's going to try to sail the North Atlantic to England. And I said, I got to know this guy. So I walked down there and I said, "Good afternoon." And he didn't say anything. I said, "How are you doing?" He said, "Fine." I said, "Could we visit a little bit?" He said, "No, I'm busy." He said, "I'm getting ready to go to England." I said, "In that?" He said, "I don't need to talk to you. I've had enough advice." And I said, "Can I watch you?" He said, "Yeah, if you don't interfere." So we sat there for a long time. And I said, "What if you don't make it?" And he looked me up and down and he said, "It ain't the getting there that's important. It's the going." And a little phrase came into my mind: winning is beginning. It's not the destination, it's the trip. And miracles happen to people like that. That idiot made it to England in that little boat. But getting there was secondary to going. And that is profoundly true where faith in God is concerned. Go before you know. If River Bend had figured out how to get here, we wouldn't be here. If we could figure out how to get where we're going, we wouldn't be here. Miracles happen when people go before they know. Third example, it rhymes too. You're in miracle territory when you keep your eyes on the prize. It says, Moses forsook the courts of Pharaoh, gave up his kingdom to be with his people because he thought it was better to suffer for the Messiah than to have all the treasures of Egypt. And then the little verse says, because he kept his eyes on the future reward. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm a little weary of fast everything. We got fast food, we got fast fun, we got fast relationships, we got fast fortunes. And a politician can't get elected to office in this country unless he promises everybody fast everything. I was thinking this week we're about to get into a big war in the Middle East, and there's something, in my mind, is fishy about all of that. Here we are on the verge of an economic collapse in our country because the politicians have been promising us instant everything. We want more and more services, but we don't want any more taxes. I read the other day where 87% of the American people in a survey voted that they wanted more services from the government, but they wanted taxes lowered. I believe like that. I think they should raise your taxes just so they don't raise mine. It'd be all right. We want instant everything. And somewhere in the midst of this, we've got to be able to put our eyes on the goal, on the prize of where we're going. In 1965, I was in graduate school, living in Houston, going to school in Fort Worth, and I was on the staff of this large church during I would preach every now and then as assistant pastor. And one day I got a call, and the voice on the other end of the line says, "This is Charlie Duke, the astronaut." And I said, "Yeah, and I'm Richard Nixon." He said, "No, this is Charlie Duke." He said, "We're starting a new church out here by NASA. And we've been listening to you preach when your pastor lets you preach, and we think you're the man for the church." And he came and got me. I mean, this was 1965, and you can imagine an astronaut came and got me, and he took me, and he drove me all around this beautiful area down by NASA, and there were all these new homes, and he stopped by and said, "Oh, by the way, this is the parsonage." Beautiful brick homes set underneath big oak trees, and it had air conditioning. I mean, not a window unit, central air conditioning. He said, "This is our parsonage." And then he took me to the church, and it sat on 4 acres. He said, "We filled it up the first Sunday." He said, "And astronauts and space scientists are here, and if you come to pastor this church, you'll be able to sit in that little room over there where they direct the space flights, and you'll be able to see everything." And he took me to NASA, and he put me in that modular thing with that artificial spaceship and let me fly it a little bit. Golly. "You're the man." I said, "That's what I had figured. I'm the man." So I met with a committee, and I said, I'm starting out my doctoral program. I've qualified for my PhD school. It's going to take 3 or 4 years to finish it. Will you allow me to just go to school? And they said, "No, this is an opportunity of a lifetime. We don't want a student. We don't want a part-time pastor. We want a full-time pastor." And boy, I didn't know what to do. I went through all kinds of problems. Had, old clunker cars and barely eating. And I went back up to school, and I met with Dr. T.B. Masson, that grand old saint. And he used to sit at his desk with his hands folded and his two thumbs on his chin like this. And he listened to my story. And I asked him what I should do, and he just listened for a long time, and then finally he said, Hebrews 11:26. I said, huh? He said, out, Mr. Mann. I ran back to my cubicle, and I opened up Hebrews, and I got to the 11th chapter, the 26th verse, and it says, Moses reckoned that to suffer hardships for the Messiah was worth more than the treasures of Egypt. For he kept his eyes on the future prize. It broke my heart, but I said no. It was 4 years before I finished school. But I had in my mind's eye a dream that God had appointed me to build a great church. It would be 26 years later till we stand here today in this great church, which I was born to build. I was at a wedding 3 weeks ago in that area of town, and I went by, and the church is falling down and growing up in weeds, and that beautiful subdivision is now in transition with crackling paint, and the place is deteriorated. People who experience miracles are the ones who are able to keep from buying into this great myth we have in this country called nirvana now. You can have nirvana now. People who experience miracles have their eyes on a prize which God has appointed them to accept. Fourth one, it rhymes too. You're in miracle territory when you perform before the storm, go before you know, eyes on the prize. And when you fight, the fright. It said the children of Israel looked behind them and they saw the Egyptians, and they looked in front of them and they saw the sea, and they defied their fear and marched straight into the sea, and it became dry land. There's not a day goes by that you and I are not called upon to walk straight into the sea of our fears. There's a great saying, do the thing you fear, and the death of fear is certain. And yet you and I don't believe that. We're so afraid. Fear drives everything destructive in us. Why do people hurt other people? They're afraid. That's why. What is anger? Anger is fear. Every time you get angry, ask yourself, what are you afraid of losing? You'll see that your anger is fear. Why do people hold on to their stuff as though it were everything? It's because to them it is everything. If they lose it, they'll die, they think. We're afraid of dying. Death is on our mind every moment. Why don't we talk about death realistically? We don't say people died. We say they passed on. They didn't. They died. We don't call a cemetery. We call it a memorial park. Every time I do a funeral, they put plastic grass over the dirt. You've been there. We talk about the deceased. We don't talk about the corpse. It's because we're all so afraid. If you want miracles to happen, you have to defy your fears. You have to fight the fright. We have coffee and conversation, a new thing we've been doing for several months. Church is so big I can't know everybody. If you'd like to host one, I'd be glad to come to it. Once every other week, I meet with 10 or 20 families at somebody's house for coffee and conversation. No agenda, no pledge cards are handed out. We just visit and get to know each other. And I was with some young couples at Dan McGraw's house not long ago, and Sue McGraw's house, I should say. And we were going around talking about who we were and why we came to Riverbend, and talk about something good that had happened in your life. We got to a young couple, and I think he's in school and has a job, and she has a job. And she said, a miracle has happened to us. She said, let me tell you something amazing. She said, we're like most everybody else. We have a lot of months left over at the end of the money. And she said, we've always really been wrestling with how to give to God, and said, we just decided we would take a chance, face our fears, and start writing the first 10% to God. And she said, a miracle happened. We're able to do it. And all kinds of good things happened that we never dreamed would happen. And she said, it's a miracle. Now, I'm not trying to dun you for money. I'm giving you a testimony of somebody who's been there. You see, what they decided to do was fight their fright. And miracles happen when people fight their fright. There's some of you that wouldn't be caught dead crying. You need to learn to cry. That's why God gave you tear ducts. There's some of you who think it's unmanly to say, I'm sorry. Fight your fright. There's some of you who would not dare stand up in front of other people and say, I want to declare my life for Jesus Christ. I'm too afraid that people would look down on me. Fight your fright. That's when miracles happen. Any miracles happening to you? I challenge you to perform without the storm. I challenge you to go before you know. I challenge you to keep your eyes not on right now, but the prize out there. And I challenge you to stand up to your fear, to fight your fright. Miracles happen when you move into that territory.
Thank you for joining us for the series, The Power of Principle Thinking. For information on other audio tapes or books by Dr. Gerald Mann, please call 1-800-388-9500 or write to Gerald Mann Ministries, Post Office Box 160-100, Austin, Texas 78716. You can now select the next tape in the series, The Power of Principle Thinking, from Dr. Gerald Mann.